I know who killed Tim Kono. Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rebecca. If you haven't been here before, welcome. So today's video is going to be a little different than my usual videos. You all know that I'm kind of like a TV show lover, and because of that I wanted to discuss one of my favorite TV shows that I am watching right now, but in kind of an unusual way. So I'm watching Only Murders in the Building with Selena Gomez, Steve Martin, and Martin Short, and I'm really loving it right now. But instead of doing a normal TV series review, I wanted to give you all my best attempt at solving this murder mystery. So basically what we're going to be doing today is I am going to be telling you all the clues that I found in the series and why I think the murderer is who I think it is. And I want you all to let me know down in the comments below if you agree, if you disagree, if you found clues of your own that you think are important. There is always stuff that I am inevitably going to have missed. So in preparation for this role, I watched the series twice. So thus far there have been 6 episodes. New episodes are released every Tuesday. Literally when the clock strikes 12:01, a new episode is dropped. So I figured that after this week's episode, I wanted to take my guess. We're about halfway through the series. I just wanted to take my best guess, because don't we all want to guess who the murderer is before they tell us? Just a quick disclaimer, if you have not seen the show yet, if you have not watched until episode 6, then you better turn it around right now, pause this video, go catch up, and then come back, because there are going to be spoilers ahead. Maybe we should start with the clues that I've gathered. So the first clue that I think is really important is the floor that each person lives on. So Charles lives in 14C on the 14th floor. Oliver lives on the 10th floor, 10D. Mabel lives on the 12th floor. There is some debate about what exact room she is in. It might be 12A, it might be 12E, we're not positive. We know that Tim Kono lived... Sorry, it's thundering. It's the mood for this. We know that Tim Kono lived in 9A, so he was on the 9th floor. And we know that Zoe's family, the girl who was murdered, they owned the entire 11th floor. We know that Teddy Dima and his son Theo live in 6B, and that Jan, our sexy bassoonist, lives in 6A. So that is the first clue, where everyone lives in the building. And I created this nifty little image for us to remember and visualize, because I'm a visual person, where everyone lives in the building. So clue number 2. We have Tim's notes and the garbage bag. So obviously in episode 1 we see that Tim Kono has died in suspicious ways. We see that Mabel and Oliver and Charles have decided to go and find the plastic bag that he had when he entered the elevator. Another important clue. Tim entered the elevator from floor 6. So he entered on 6, he went up to 9. So we can maybe draw the conclusion that he was seeing someone on floor 6 who gave him the garbage bag, and he was on his way to floor 9 to go back to his room. Later on, obviously, we discover that he has died, and Mabel wants to know what's in the garbage bag. So they go down to the trash. There's a trash chute apparently on every floor, so it's suspicious. Why would he carry this trash bag up into his room or onto his floor to throw it away? And they find 2 notes inside the garbage bag. Something suspicious that I found in the notes. One note is written in all capital letters, and the other note is written in some capital, some lowercase. And honestly, the handwriting on these 2 notes doesn't match up. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't look like one person wrote both of these notes. So why would Tim Kono have 2 notes in his possession? Why would he have 2 notes that don't match handwriting? So I found the third clue in episode 2, the memorial. So we're looking at the memorial for Tim Kono. Everyone's going downstairs to pay their respects. Mabel, Oliver, and Charles decide to go so that they can investigate. We see that there are people who are there, but there are also people who are missing. Notable people who aren't there: Jan, sexy bassoonist, is nowhere to be seen. Teddy Demas is not there. We don't know why, but Theo is there. And Theo is unpacking the dip for the patrons, and he's kind of standing to the side, and there's one point where I paused the episode and I was kind of looking at Theo, seeing what was going on, and then you pause to this scene and you see that Theo seems to be staring at Mabel. So there's something suspicious there. We're like, Theo, who is Teddy Demas's deaf son, is staring at Mabel during this scene. Then clue 4, we hear that Howard's cat Evelyn has died. She has died the same night that Tim Kono has died. So here's what I have concluded from this, from a bit of some assumption, but I would say this is probably going to be true for the series. So Evelyn dies the same night that Tim dies. We know that she was in his apartment because we see her little kitty footprints going through, you know, what's left of Tim, and that same night Evelyn goes home and she dies. How can this be? How can Evelyn and Tim die at the same time? Well, Tim was poisoned, and Evelyn, having gone through his apartment, walked through his blood, presumably cleaned her paws off after doing that, because that's something that cats commonly do, has succumbed to the poison that Tim has succumbed to. And I also listened to the Only Murders in the Building podcast, which is hosted by people who created the show, and so it has like writers and producers on the show as well as actors. And the man who played Howard said that they cut a line where Howard mentions that Evelyn likes to lick his fingers after he's eaten something as an affectionate moment between them. So we know Evelyn likes to lick people's fingers. We know that Tim was probably poisoned. We know that Evelyn went in through his bedroom, probably licked his fingers, possibly was contaminated through his blood, went home and died that same night. And we know that the toxicology report that the police created was actually never submitted, so he was never checked to see if he was poisoned. And we know that Howard has Evelyn's body frozen in his freezer so that he can run a toxicology report because he believes that Tim poisoned Evelyn. And I believe that too, only I believe that he mistakenly post-mortem poisoned Evelyn. So now, clue number 5. After Oliver goes down and talks to Teddy Demas 2 times to get funding for this podcast, a note appears on Oliver's door. And it is a note that is threatening him. It says, "End the podcast or I end you." And it's in all capital letters. It's in handwriting that we don't really recognize. When we look at the notes that Tim had written, there's another one in all capital letters, but the E's look very different. So we see this threatening note. Oliver enters his home to realize that his dog Winnie has been poisoned. So this is the 3rd time we've heard of poison in 2 episodes, I think. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, someone needs to have the keys to all the apartment buildings in order to be able to get into Oliver's apartment. Well, in one of the scenes, Oliver makes the statement that he never locks his front door. So it's easy enough that someone could walk straight in and poison Winnie. So this 5th clue is interesting because we know that whoever wrote the note on Oliver's door must have known that the podcast existed, and there were only a couple of people who knew about the podcast in this moment that we are absolutely sure of. We know that Teddy Demas knew about the podcast. We know that Sting knew about the podcast because Oliver told him in the elevator. We can assume that Theo Demas knew about the podcast because maybe Teddy told his son after Oliver left. There's also some suspicious theories about Theo that I will share a little bit later. But so those are the only people other than Mabel and Charles that we know about the podcast. There is another theory that I have. So Jan lives in 6A and Theo and Teddy live in 6B. We know that from Mabel's room, we could hear Bunny, who lives on the same floor as her, through the air vents. Is it possible that Jan heard Oliver and Teddy discussing the podcast through the air vent? Is it possible that Jan overheard Oliver talking to Teddy in the hallway discussing the podcast? Is it possible that there are 4 people at random who we don't even know who might know about the podcast because they had 4 listeners at that point? It's possible. So at the end of the day, there's no conclusion to who put that note on Oliver's door. We move on to episode 5. Kind of skipped over 4. There's some key information there, but I'm going to come back to it later. Clue 6, we learned about Angel in episode 5. Angel is a black market dealer that Tim Kono knew, and we also know from Tavo, Mabel's cousin, that Tim was trying to take this black market jewelry dealer down. We also know that Tim has all this jewelry in his apartment, so it makes sense that he was acquiring this jewelry in order to try and take down this dealer, and it also makes sense that Tim was going through some financial strain. If he was paying this black market dealer to acquire these expensive jewelry pieces, it's very possible that he spent most of his money on these pieces. Clue number 7. After episode 6, the most recent episode to drop, we find that Tim was looking for the ring that Zoe was wearing the night that she was murdered. And this clue is especially interesting because when Mabel asks Zoe where she got the ring, Zoe says that she found it. And we know from multiple episodes that Zoe had a history of taking things that did not belong to her. Mabel said something along the lines of, Zoe's family owns the whole entire 11th floor, but that's not enough for Zoe. And as they were playing Hardy Boys throughout the apartment, it was pretty clear that Zoe was taking things from some of the apartments. And in this case, we find this ring and it seems like we can draw the conclusion that Zoe stole this in some capacity. So clue number 8, this is my last and final clue, is that Teddy tells this entire story, Teddy Demas tells an entire story about his grandmother, and her name in Greek translates to angel in English. And we learn when Teddy gifts the check to Oliver and Charles that the name of the check on top is called Angel Inc. So this puts a huge target on Teddy's back, but it seems like Teddy has this separate Angel Inc. bank account to be able to make investments in Broadway shows, in rogue podcasts, in things that he believes in and thinks are interesting. It's very suspicious because obviously Angel is the name that the black market jewelry dealer goes by. So it raises questions. Is Teddy Angel? Is the money that Angel is getting through this black market jewelry business going into this account? We cannot be sure of any of these things. So now that I've showed you all the clues that I think are really essential for figuring out who the murderer is, I am going to tell you who I think the murderer is. First of all, I'm sure that there are clues that I missed. I'm sure that there are clues that you are going to drop in the comments, so I'm not saying that these are all the clues. I'm just saying that these are some of the ones that stood out the most heavily to me that I thought were really, really important. Within the podcast, the producers and hosts say that there are many red herrings throughout the series. I recently learned that a red herring is someone that a mystery series wants to make look like is the murderer, but it's actually not, is like, they're like a decoy. Here's where I tell you who killed Tim Kono. Jan killed Tim Kono, and here's why. So we first meet Jan, I believe, in episode 2. She's carrying a bassoon. She's a bassoonist. The first time we actually hear Jan is in the first episode right before the 3 stars of our show are going and getting ready to listen to their podcast, OK in Oklahoma. We hear the bassoon echoing through the halls of this apartment building. So that right there, if you listen to episode 1, Charles is standing by the window, he's kind of admiring it, and you can hear a little bit of bassoon. But then Charles closes his window because he's getting ready to listen to his podcast, and he steps away. And they're listening to the podcast for a certain amount of time, and then we all know that the fire alarm goes off. So we know that Jan was in the building because we hear the bassoon playing. So we know she was there when Tim Kono was murdered. So we meet Jan in episode 2, and immediately her and Charles seem to have a little thing going. By the time she exits the elevator, we see that she gets on floor 6, and that's where she meets them. And in episode 4, we find Charles looking at the window, listening to the sounds of a beautiful bassoon coming from a sexy bassoonist. And that's Jan, and he recognizes her from the window. He can see her across the way, and he starts playing along with her, and they're playing together, and it's like a really cute moment. And all of a sudden Charles looks over and she's gone. She's not in the chair anymore. And seconds later, a note is pushed under his door, and on that note is written, "Dinner, ? Lobby in an hour. This is Jan, by the way." Now, if you look at this note, I believe that this note looks like it's the same handwriting in the photo I showed of one of Tim Kono's notes that he wrote. I'm going to put them side by side. You can let me know what you think. But I'm going to say the J's look the same. Her J is like detached, and the stem doesn't all the way hit that J. The penmanship overall looks very similar to me. And it's in like a normal, capital letter and then lowercase. Then we are pulled to the part where Charles and Jan are actually on the date together, and everything is going well. We're listening to Jan's story, and she's saying how she had 2 childhoods. One where she was a happy only child, and another where her father divorces her mother and is remarried, and she has a half-sister. And this half-sister is favored and can apparently do no wrong. So Jan is spiteful of the fact that she has this younger half-sister, that this sister is stealing her father away from her, and that she is pushed to play the bassoon instead of the flute because her sister got to play the flute instead of her. Now, I believe that her half-sister is Zoe, and here's why. I believe that Jan's father divorced her mother and remarried Zoe's mother, and then they had Zoe together. Zoe is a kid who is stealing things from other apartments, copying keys, the kind of person that kind of seems like she always gets what she wants. And it's just really suspicious that Jan would mention this half-sister, who would be considerably younger than she is, who's favored all the time, who steals her father away. Then Jan goes on to say that her therapist told her that we are all driven to recreate the dynamic of our first wound so we can change the ending. So if that isn't a little bit creepy crawly and suspicious and doesn't make your skin crawl, then you're braver than I am. So I'm going to come back to that exact quote. But let's look at this specifically. Amy Ryan, the woman who plays Jan, is actually 53 years old. So in the show, we can assume that she is around 50 years old. Maybe she's, leaning towards 47, 48, 49. She is dating Charles, who's supposed to be, late 60s. So we can assume that she is late 40s, early 50s in the show. So the murder of Zoe happened a decade earlier. Let's say Jan's 48. So that means that when Zoe was killed, Jan was 38. And if we are to assume that Zoe was about 18 years old, that would make Jan 20 when Zoe was born. So that would make sense that she feels neglected. She's the older sister. She's not being taken care of in the way that baby Zoe is. So we know that Zoe's last name is Cassidy because in the car ride in episode 5, when Oliver and Charles are chasing Mabel, Oliver looks it up and says that a girl named Zoe Cassidy was pushed off of the top of the Arconia and that she died about 10 years ago in 2010. So that's an interesting and important fact. So now we know that Zoe was stealing from the Arconia from different residents. We can assume that she stole the ring that she had on the night that she was murdered, and we can also assume that the reason she was murdered had something to do with that ring. So now we also know that Tim Kono left the 6th floor on the first episode, and we know that Jan is someone who lives on the 6th floor. We also know that Theo lives on the 6th floor, and Teddy, but we know that Tim was trying to take down this black market jeweler, and here's where things get a little complicated. I believe that Jan is also Angel. I believe that Jan is Angel because there is a photo on Teddy Demas's mantle, and this might be a stretch. There's a photo on Teddy Demas's mantle of a young blonde child with a young brunette child, and it looks like the blonde child is a girl and that the brown-haired child might be a boy. And so they specifically show this shot when they're kind of panning towards Theo when Oliver's talking about the podcast. But I believe that that photo is a photo of Jan and Teddy. I believe that Jan and Teddy are related, and that their parents, one of each on either side, were siblings. So we know that Teddy's father is the one who has the grandmother named Angel, and we can assume that maybe Jan's mother was Teddy's father's sister. In this case, Jan's grandmother would also be named Angel, and they would share a grandparent. Now you might be saying, well, what about the coin? Teddy has the coin and she doesn't. Well, Teddy said that the coin was passed down to his father because he held the Demas name, assuming that her mother wouldn't have held the Demas name because she would have gotten married to Jan's father, and then they would have had her. So she would have taken Jan's father's name. It seems like families in the Arconia sometimes own multiple apartment buildings, sometimes next to each other. So maybe Jan lives in 6A, Teddy lives in 6B. Those are familial apartments that have been passed down through the generations. Jan and Teddy are cousins. That would make Theo some sort of like nephew, like first nephew or nephew once removed of Jan's. And this would be how she would relate to Angel and why she might take that name as this black market jewelry thief. Now, let's continue. I don't want to lose you here. So this is current day. Jan is Angel. Jan also has murdered Zoe, and Jan has also murdered Tim Kono. This is what I think. So, on the day 10 years earlier, when Zoe is killed, she's stolen a ring. I'm not exactly sure why Jan and Zoe would have argued. Maybe Zoe found the ring and decided to keep it for herself in a moment of selfishness. We can kind of see that that would go with Zoe's character. Maybe Zoe and Jan are fighting over the ring because it's, you know, valuable and they both want to keep it. But for whatever reason, Jan and Zoe get in a spat, and Jan pushes Zoe off the roof to obtain the ring, because when Zoe lands, we know that she doesn't have the ring anymore. So this happens. Tim sees what he thinks is the murder go down. We can see in the background of the party video that Theo is actually at the New Year's Eve party on the roof. As far as I can tell, that is Theo. Theo is around the same age as Mabel and the rest of the Hardy Boys, and I have two theories. I guess I'll start with the first one. Tim was with Zoe when she was stealing this stuff, was with Zoe when she was breaking into these different apartments, was with Oscar and Mabel. And when Jan turns around and sees that Tim has seen what she has done, she says, Tim, don't tell anyone or I will have you all prosecuted and you will go down with me as stealing and, you know, breaking and entering. And Tim, knowing that that would ruin his life and also Mabel's life, who he clearly cares about, says, okay, I'm gonna back off because I want me and Mabel to be able to escape this. That's why he doesn't tell anyone what he saw, and he lets Oscar take the fall for it. Now, 10 years later, Jan is in her apartment. She is doing business with Tim. He is coming from her apartment to like receiving, you know, jewelry that she is selling him. He knows that she is Angel, or he suspects it in some way, and she hears or figures out that he is trying to take her down as a black market jewelry dealer, and when she realizes what he's doing, she murders him to keep him quiet. Maybe she poisons him when he is visiting her apartment. Maybe she puts something into his air vent and turns the air on. Maybe she just poisons his food without him knowing. But at the end of the day, I believe that Jan had the time to play the bassoon and be present at the Arconia. Jan had enough time to put her bassoon down, go to the elevator, which would have lifted her directly up to where Tim's room would have been. She would have had time to trigger the alarm system, enter Tim's room, find him dying of whatever poison she made him ingest, shoot him, and plant the evidence. So I believe that that is how this story is going to unfold. Jan is the murderer. Jan did it. Jan is related to the Dimas, and how this plays out and why this is necessary is because she has the name Angel. Because I believe that if she's related, maybe the Angel Inc. account is an account that she's putting the money that she's getting from the black market into. Maybe Teddy, Angel Inc. invested in her as like a business, and he doesn't know where the money's coming from, but she's putting money in there because Teddy is really well off and he has enough money to invest in these Broadway shows. So it's possible that Jan is putting money into their family account as like a cover. And I already told you how Jan knew about the podcast. I believe that she either heard it when Oliver was outside of Teddy Demas's apartment talking about it because she lives right next door, that she heard it through the vents in the same way that Mabel can hear Bunny speaking through the vents, or that she was one of the first 4 podcast listeners, which I think is a little bit more unlikely. I think that her rage of always coming in second made her do what her therapist said, recreate her first wound, being wounded by her sister again, having her sister steal from her, having her sister claim this ring as her own, and in an attempt to change the ending, Jan pushes Zoe off of the top of the Arconia and takes the ring for herself and continues her black market business up until today. And that is why I think Jan is the murderer. Now, I will say I have one other theory. The reason that I don't think that Theo is the murderer specifically is because the next episode, episode 7, is called The Boy in 6B, and the episode is entirely about Theo. And I think that any episode that is going to center on a character in that way is going to try and draw attention to them as a red herring, but he's not actually going to be the murderer. I think he's involved. I think that the second theory is branching off of that first theory, but I don't necessarily think that he's the mastermind. So, we know that 2 different people wrote those quote-unquote notes that Tim threw away in the garbage. I think that it is possible, and here's why I think this. In the second episode, Mabel returns to Tim's apartment. She is talking to Figment of her imagination, Tim. She says, "Who's the ring for?" Because she thinks that the wedding ring at the time is for someone specific, and he says, "Why, are you wondering if I ever found anyone to love me?" Now, this is a suspicious comment to me because it suggests that at the time that they were friends, those 10 years ago, Tim wasn't really in a relationship with anyone, wasn't like romantically invested in anyone. What if Tim and Theo met when they were children and they fell in love? And that day that he was getting into the elevator, he was coming from Theo Demas's apartment, visiting the man that he loved. What if Theo and Tim were both trying to take down Angel, and because of this, maybe Tim and Theo knew that they were in danger, and maybe they were writing those notes in an attempt to fake their own deaths and escape somewhere together, knowing that they were both at risk of, possible death. What if the night that Zoe was murdered, the person who Tim saw arguing with Zoe was Theo? What if Tim thought that Theo was the one who pushed Zoe off of the building? And Theo tried to explain to Tim, like, no, it wasn't me, you don't understand, you didn't see it. And because of Tim's love for Theo, he decided not to accuse him of that murder. And maybe who Tim saw fighting with Zoe was Theo, and he thought if Zoe was pushed off the building, then it must have been Theo. But he didn't want to implicate Theo because he was in love with him. And then later on, he and Theo got together and realized that Angel was the person who really murdered Zoe. And having this connection with Jan, who I do still think in this situation would be Angel, Theo and Tim set out on this mission to figure out who actually killed Zoe so they can clear their names, so they can get Oscar out of prison, and so that Angel can go to prison and they won't have to worry for their lives anymore. Either Theo knew that Jan was Angel and they were trying to prove that she was Angel, or Jan figured out what Theo was up to, and in an attempt to stop Tim from going to the police and figuring out that she was Angel, or maybe he already knew, maybe to stop him from proving that she was Angel, she murders him to end any suspicion that it might be her, knowing that Theo, in this situation, they would still be related, would have lost the love of his life and be devastated and probably not look into it anymore, or maybe be scared for his life. In this situation, it makes sense why in the next episode it's captioned that Theo is spying on Mabel, spying on Charles, spying on Oliver. It would make sense why Theo was staring at Mabel. Maybe he thinks that she's Angel, maybe he's suspicious of her, maybe he wants her help, maybe he knows who it is and like is desperately trying to tell her. But at the end of the day, I think that it's possible that the reason that Tim didn't tell the police that Oscar didn't kill Zoe is because the person he saw arguing with her was Theo, and he loved him. And in this situation, Jan is still the person who pushed Zoe. Jan is still the person who murdered Tim, but the reasoning behind Tim's refusal to tell the truth about Oscar is because the man he loved would have looked like he was implicated in the murder. And he believed Theo. He believed that he didn't do it. And I believe that he didn't do it. So that is my theory. In both theories, I believe that Jan is the murderer. In both theories, I believe that Jan and the Demas family are related. In both theories, I believe that Jan is Zoe's older half-sister, and that Zoe stole Jan's father away from her, and that in a argument of passion and anger, and in an attempt to right the wrongs that Jan felt had been done to her in the past, she pushed Zoe off of that building. And to protect her and her business, 10 years later, she murdered Tim Kono. I am so excited to watch with all of you and find out in episode 10 who the real killer is. I hope you enjoyed this video and me and my theorizing and my kooky ideas about who killed Tim Kono. If you have any theories, please drop them in the comments. I would love to read them. Tell me all about who you think the murderer is. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, the bell notification, all those YouTube-y things, and I will see you all next time with another video.